All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football podcast. Today, me and Nick here will be kicking off our 2024 season previews for every single Power 5 team and probably a couple of Group of Fives as well. We're going to do every single team for the next how many ever days, starting with the SEC. So starting here with Arkansas, ending with Vanderbilt in about a week and a half or 2 weeks. So make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. There's going to be a lot of content coming out. And kicking things off with the Razorbacks, Nick, this coaching staff. Sam Pittman gets one more year of life, 23-25 record through 4 seasons. Bobby Petrino rides his motorcycle back to Fayetteville. Spent last year at Texas A&M. He was a former head coach here. A lot of people remember that tenure. And Travis Williams and Marcus Woodson, both in their second year as the co-defensive coordinators. The biggest headline really for this team was they were a massive disappointment last season, going 4-8. Lost 4 games by 1 score. 3 of them were versus ranked opponents. So they held in well at times. We're just not able to get victories in that column. Looking at the offensive side of the ball, and a lot of the disappointment stems from them just not being able to run the football very well. Nick, the offensive line we'll get to was incredibly disappointing. Raheem Sanders was beat up all year long, so they certainly lost him in that regard. KJ Jefferson wasn't as strong, but he also had to really carry this team more than I think a lot of people expected. But he still only had about 176 yards per game through the air. KJ transfers out along with Jacoby Criswell, which leads us to Taylon Green from Boise State. This is a player that has great size, 6'6", 223, a long striding runner, some good long speed as well. Still developing as a passer. The downfield awareness and accuracy needs fine-tune. Doesn't always put his body in the throws, but he does have some solid touch. The velocity isn't great, but overall, this is just an absurd runner. He looks like a running back with the ball in his hands. His top gear has a lot of urgency as well when he runs. He's in a battle with Malachi Singleton, former 4-star from the state of Georgia. Another thicker-built quarterback, embraces contact, has RPO experience, so should really fit into this offense. Most presume he will. Seems to have a better arm talent from a mechanic and velocity standpoint right now than Green does. He has those skills to be a point guard style of player as a distributor here. What do you make of this offense, Nick, at least at the quarterback position, where Jefferson last year, I thought he'd be the conference player of the year, didn't come anywhere close to that. Now you have 2 new fresh faces.
Arkansas has to go out to the portal and grab a quarterback in Taylon Green. Green comes over from Boise State, where he looked good at times. I was impressed. 6'6", 223. That's a huge frame there. Like you alluded to, a big runner. I think that's a big part of his game. 78 carries for 436 yards, 5.6 yards per carry, and 9 scores on the ground last year in the Mountain West. As a passer, 57.1% comp rate, 1,700 yards passing, 8.3 yards per attempt, 11 touchdowns and 9 interceptions. So obviously not the most polished passer, right below 6% comp rate. Certainly something you want to work on if you're down in Arkansas. I like Malachi Singleton to be potentially in the competition for this starting job. I think Singleton's a very underrated young quarterback who obviously hasn't had a lot of experience playing at the FBS level, but he was a really solid high school recruit out of Georgia, 4-star. I like him as well. Bigger, bulky kid at 228, but he's 6'1", so a little bit of a more interesting frame. I like the arm on him. I think he's got good reads as well in the pocket. Overall here, I think both quarterbacks have an opportunity to battle for this position. Obviously, Green is sort of the guy that you're thinking is going to get the starting job because they plucked him out of the portal and he has experience starting for a pretty solid Boise State team last year. But don't be shocked if Singleton goes out there and gets some good reps early on.
The expectation is Green and Jaquindon Jackson coming over from Utah can really help restore this rushing offense. 800 yards and 4 touchdowns and nearly 5 yards per touch for Jackson. This is a player that was a converted quarterback. He's a great downhill runner, has great toughness and physicality. A pure zone runner, used on the inside zone a lot, has some good vision. He loves the spin move. He was really dinged up early in 2023, though, and it kind of carried out throughout the rest of the season. A guy who's a physical specimen at 228 pounds. Obviously, Rashad Dubinion, a veteran who's got some quick feet, can really gear down in a hurry. I think he's a physical runner who's really hard to tackle with the arms only. Not the most explosive runner, so hard to produce without an offensive line. He's also coming off a torn meniscus. You look at the rest of the running back room, 4-star Braylon Russell, 252-pound back, really impressing the staff. Good athleticism for his size with some quick feet. And then, they picked up Rodney Hill. He has 2 seasons of experience under his belt with Florida State. This is a running back room. Obviously, losing Sanders is a big deal, Nick. But, I like this pairing here of Green and Jackson. I think you have some nice size, of course, and I think the versatility is something that might be able to uplift this run game if they can get out to the edge and make plays. Because when I was watching Taylon Green highlights, when he gets out to the edge, boy, he's hard to stop.
Another player coming from out west, this time Jackson from Utah, 6'2", 228. I like the frame on him, solid player. 12 games last year. He was a little banged up in all 12 of those games, but still at 161 carries, like you said, 800 yards roughly, and 4 touchdowns on the ground. Solid stats there, in my opinion. Rashad Dubignon as well, a solid player, 5'10", 216. He appeared in 10 games, 82 carries, 260 yards, a touchdown, plus he had a receiving touchdown as well. He's a really good number 2 back. I like him on thirds down. I think they can rotate him in and out. I think this is a nice 1-2 punch there. Plus you have Green, who's going to be able to run a lot and absorb contact. That's a really nice, 3-headed monster if you look at it. I expect them to be able to use a lot of different RPO type action and use some running plays out of the backfield.
Looking at this wide receiver group, this was a unit last year I thought would play better than they did, adding a lot of these guys via transfer. Good news for them, though, is all these guys are back. Andrew Armstrong, great speed, really good at attacking inside off of his release. Good leaping ability / concentration, a playmaker. I like his open field abilities. Proved to be, a greatly valuable player in intermediate game for them. Isaiah Satenga, a speed guy that's from the Fayetteville area. Had a pair of explosive plays late in the year. Hasn't, been used properly, really. 6'4", 216 pounds, has gotten much bigger in size to potentially be versatile in his alignment. And Tyrone Broden, he played nearly 209 snaps, didn't see the ball when he had 109 yards, but he's got unique size, 6'7", 195, long strider, great downfield, a great athlete. I like his skills in the red zone, great at adjusting to the ball. When he was playing at Bowling Green, he has noticeable talent, so I think this is a nice starting trio they have here. Obviously, the production for some of these guys wasn't very happy. They weren't very happy with, but Dan Enos really struggled to adapt. He didn't exactly listen to Sam Pittman on game days either, so that really, caused this passing attack to stall out a lot, Nick. And I don't think you're going to see that under Petrino. I think you're going to see these 3 guys here, and then some of the depth pieces we'll talk about in a second get really involved.
I like Armstrong a lot as your leader here, right? I think he's got a good frame. 12 games last year, 56 receptions, led the team with that number, 764. Also led the team with that number, 13.6 yards per grab. 5 touchdowns, a nice red zone threat there. I think Stagna's a really solid player as well, 129 yards receiving, 8.6 yards per grab, and 2 scores. Broden, a nice red zone threat when he was getting targeted, 3 touchdowns, 7.3 yards per grab, and 109 yards total on 15 grabs. Some other good depth pieces we're going to talk about in a second here. Also, I like this tight end room. When you bring in a new coordinator here, I think Bob Petrino is going to be an exciting new coordinator and get some new looks here, create some new offensive stability, and draw up a new game plan with Green under center. I like Armstrong certainly to lead the way. I think he's really solid. And that Broden frame, like you mentioned, 6'7", 195, very interesting frame, but could be really solid with jump balls. Obviously, like to see if he could bulk up a little bit potentially. But overall, I think those 3 starters there, they're all coming back. They have experience from last year. That's a nice thing to see in the SEC.
And for the Hogs, the entire pass-catching group is back. Isaac Tesla needs to really separate better than did last year. Jaden Wilson was solid out of the slot early in the year. Nothing really the rest of the way. Davion Dozier has impressive athletic ability, could really break out. And like you said, this tight end group, it might be the best spot on the roster. Ty Washington had a major game versus Ole Miss, got hurt a few weeks later. Marquise Gums was productive at UNT. Nothing last year, though. Andreas Paskey, an impactful add due to his blocking abilities. And then, of course, Luke Hazen, a physical player who was very patient on his releases. Seems to understand defenses very well. Not your typical tight end build. He has 6'3", 242, but seems a little bit slimmer and has some really nice speed. This is a guy that really impressed early on in the season. Obviously had a big monster game, 116, 2 scores against LSU after having 78 and a touchdown the week prior. His first catch was a 14-yarder against Texas A&M, got hurt. I think it was a broken collarbone, I believe. And I specifically remember that play, Nick, because I ran him in my fantasy lineup, and I was like, boom, first play of the game, 14 yards. He got hurt, though. It was looking like it was going to be another big day for him. Didn't play the rest of the year. But like you said, this is a tight end room. I think it might be the best possessional group on this team, especially this offense, though.
I like this tight end group a lot. I think the tight end that you were just talking about there, Hazen, is a really solid player, right? Only played in 5 games, but 253 yards receiving, 15.8 yards per grab, and the 3 scores for the sophomore. Tons of games left in him. Ty Washington, another good player who was banged up, 170 yards receiving, 8.6 yards per grab, and 2 scores for him. I like Tesla, Dozier, and Wilson as well. Tesla, he was a really solid player, 34 grabs for 351 yards, 10.3 yards per grab, and 2 scores. Dozier didn't really play a whole lot, but his 1 catch was a touchdown, so he made the most of his targets. And then Wilson there at the bottom had about 200 yards receiving, 13.3 yards per grab, and 2 scores. I think this is a very well-rounded wide receiving unit. No superstars, no one jumping off the page at you, but a bunch of guys who are committed to the brand and are going to work hard in practice and work hard on game days for you. This is a nice unit top to bottom on the offense. We're going to talk about the offensive line in a second, which does concern me, but I like what they have at tight end and wide receiver, certainly.
Yeah, this offensive line, I certainly have a bit of a bone to pick with them, and I'll get to that. Eric Matos, new O-line coach. They lose 3 starters, including Brady Latham and Bo Limmer. Tykees Crawford, 6'5", 319. Development hasn't exactly come to fruition, but has experience. Marion Harris, an X4 star, expected to finally compete for a starting role at 6'7", 294. Fernando Carmona, 6'5", 325, was a great pass blocker for San Jose State. He should slot in there at left tackle. And, Sam Pittman offered Addison Nichols while he was at Georgia. He ends up at Tennessee. Now he's transferring into Arkansas, is expected to be the starting center. Keyshawn Blackstock from Michigan State, a coveted 4-star from the JUCO ranks. Andrew Chamblee significantly struggled at left tackle. He now leaves the team as Pittman cites he lost love for the game. That's certainly not great to hear. Patrick Kutas wasn't much better at right tackle. Likely going to move inside as Crawford's going to stay at tackle. Somewhat experienced unit with more options in key areas. And then Joshua Braun at guard. This guy was phenomenal. Still looking to emerge as a run blocker, but his initial quickness can really, be a reason that stumps him. He can struggle with leverage, but he holds his ground if he lands hands of good placement. I think he handles stunts very well, and he was a great pass blocker at 6'6", 350. A lot of size on this offensive line. And the biggest concern for me, Nick, is they were just awful last year. They averaged 111 yards, 3 yards per carry in conference games. Pass protection at times was good, but overall wasn't where it probably should have been. And the bone to pick I have is that they lose some elite guys. Limmer is gone. Latham is gone. And this offensive line was not good at all. So how are we going to expect it to be any better now that they're losing some very crucial pieces that I thought underperformed to a degree? And even though I like, the add from San Jose State at tackle position, I think that's a very good player to add. I think Nichols will probably do very solid as well. I just find it hard for them to improve considering those guys are gone and they didn't perform very well for them anyways. Not a very good look.
If you're a Razorbacks fan, you got to be very unhappy with how the offensive line performed. Sam Pittman was an O-line coach. He was an offensive line coach at Georgia. That was his bread and butter, right? Building up the interior. When he came to Fayetteville, he said he was going to build a strong offensive line, and that was going to be the starting point for this team. And last year, the offensive line was just flat-out disappointment, and they lost a lot of talented players. I think Braun and Kutas, you're going to kind of rotate them, see who wants to go at left guard, right guard. I think those are very solid in the interior. Nichols grabs him from Tennessee, was also previously offered to Georgia, a very high-level recruit out of high school. He's a good player. I think he's got good size at 6'5", 305. You put him at center, a good leader. Carmona coming over from San Jose State. I love the size at left tackle. Can he adjust to the SEC pass rush on that side? That left side is very important to protect there. Is he going to have some trouble catching up to the speed transferring from a program like San Jose State? That's a key thing to look at. I think Blackstone as well. On the right side from Michigan State, another guy that's really solid with the 6'5", 325. Two really big tackles there on the outside. But how can both of them adjust to the speed of the SEC play? That's going to be important to watch.
The final offensive verdict for me, much of the same group that disappointed last year is back with a QB that is, somewhat a project passer. The receiving group will need to elevate. I think they're certainly capable of doing that. Really just need to separate better overall. The run game, I think, will be better with Green's ability. This offense could really surge a good bit. Encouraging ads on the offensive line. But again, it's hard to expect them to be much better as some of their best players depart. I do think the offensive line will be slightly improved to a degree. But last year in my notes, Nick, I literally said while we did our preview in Arkansas, is they will once again have a top 10 rushing attack. And they came nowhere near that. So that's something that certainly concerns me. I think this is an offense with a good bit of upside, though, depending on how Green plays. And I think that duo with him and Jackson is certainly going to help this rushing attack get in more sync.
I agree. I think this is an offense that has some potential to grow. Will they be dominant on the ground like we thought they were going to be last year? No, I don't think so. I think they still will be a solid unit. I think Green is a really good quarterback potentially. I think he's a really good runner, but you got to work on those arm mechanics. I love the tight end room. I love the wide receiving room. I worry about this offensive line. If they can find themselves in a good position early on and really get comfortable in the groove of things, get that rushing attack firing at full cylinders under Petrino, this offense can find success early on.
Now looking at the defensive side of the ball, Travis Williams, obviously one of the co-defensive coordinators. He had been with Gus Malzahn since 2013 before coming over last year. A guy who loves quarters, also lots of man coverage, likes to look to unleash his defensive line a little bit more, but they need to be more productive coming into this season. It's a unit that returns 5 starters. The run defense was completely lit up in conference play. It allowed over 200 yards per contest. They did land some good recruits, though. You look at this defensive line, though. Eric Gregory, Cameron Ball, both 318 pounds respectively. And, they have really established themselves as good run defenders on the interior. The depth is iffy, though. Nico Dalver, versatile player, but he struggled versus the run. Kiwi Rose, wasn't very good for them. J.G. Hollingsworth hasn't seen the field much, so the defensive line rotation needs to be proven because the two starters they have up front aren't going to be able to be, 50, 60 snap a players, game players that is. Charlie Collins, though, they brought in 65th overall ranked recruit. That's certainly something that's encouraging, along with Kayvon Henderson, another high upside freshman. Quincy Rhodes, he's one of the only other reserves that saw playing time. Biggest news for them, though, they have a nice pass rushing duo here. Landon Jackson, a player who is a former transfer in his own right, his motor really stands out. Hard effort player, pursues with authority, has good hands. I like his chop and rip moves. Flat out dominated Caden Proctor in that game against Alabama. 6'7", 282. Jackson is a live run defender, plays the option game well, is shown the ability to slice through gaps against the run as well. Very happy with what he was producing for the Hogs. And Anton Junkaj, fast off the line of scrimmage, a bully. He was a one-man wrecking crew, forcing 5 fumbles. Another Albany transfer, 6'3", 275. A lot of guys were thinking he might be the next Jared Verse, Nick. I think this pass rushing duo has some nice upside. The depth on the D-line overall, though, a little bit concerning, but the starting group is very formidable, and I think they're going to show a lot of improvement this year.
I love what this pass rush can do. Landon Jackson, 6'7", 282, played in 12 games last year, 44 total tackles, 13.5 tackles for loss, 6.5 sacks for Jackson. Anton Juskaj coming over from Albany, played his football in an area not too far from me, Port Jervis High School. Saw some of him in high school in the past, 12 games for him at Albany last year, 55 total tackles, 21.5 tackles for loss, and 12 sacks. Just an incredible number for him coming off the right side there. A really solid player at 6'3", 275. Very excited to see what he can do jumping up from Albany. Obviously, comparisons to Jared Verse are going to exist. Same program, moving down to bigger programs. Will he find success? I think it's certainly possible. Eric Gregory, I like him at 6'4", 324, 16 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss for him. Cavani Rose, 15 tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss, 2.5 sacks as well at nose tackle. Nice rotational pieces there. Cameron Ball, 32 total tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, and half a sack for him. Some other depth to look at. I think Quincy Rhodes is a really solid player. And depth, Nico Devani-Lair, he had 11 total tackles, 3.5 tackles for loss. So there is some nice depth rotational here, in my opinion, if they can step up. Obviously, on the surface is a really solid unit with those two guys coming off the edge there that are very solid on the left and right side of the edge. Will there be enough talent stepping up in the middle for this defense to find success? I'm not entirely sure about that.
And even though I think they have a nice starting lineup on the D-line, the biggest concern here is the linebackers only have a combined 41 career tackles. 4 of the 5 LBs on the 2 deep had transferred out. These Brad Spence, who was, good in his limited time as a freshman. Their best bet to be good, those Carson Dean, Alex Sanford, a guy that should rise up a good bit. He's going to see significant playing time. A very young group that lost a lot of guys, and the only portal ad was a pretty solid one. Xavier Sori from Georgia, wasn't able to get him on the field much. It was up for grabs the back half of the year for Georgia at the linebacking position. Sori did not win that battle. An X5 star who was a sound tackler at 6'3", 220, has bulked himself up to 6'3", 220. Uneventful 3 years for him, though, at the Bulldogs, Nick. Obviously, it's always good when you can land a Georgia player, but it's kind of the leftovers here, a guy who had opportunities to get on the field and didn't. So even though it's promising, the ceiling's clearly not that high with Xavier Sori, who's going to be expected to be a leader here in a very young linebacking core. It's probably going to struggle.
It is promising to add a player from such a very vaunted SEC defense, but a guy in Sori who just did not play a whole lot. Like you said, 6'3", 225. I like the way he's bulked up there. 11 games last year, 19 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, plus a sack. In a rotational role, can he step up that middle linebacker role? I'm not entirely sure. He's going to have to, take a big bulk of the load here and be a leader for this team. That could be a tough ask, certainly. Brad Spence, I do like him as a young freshman last year. The guy is 6'2", 240, 16 total tackles for him, 1.5 tackles for loss, 4 pass breakups in 11 games. Sanford and Dean, they didn't really play a whole lot last year, but they have some room to grow. 2 solid guys there. The depth, though, and overall this unit's talent is lacking. Definitely the weakest part of this defense. That linebacker in the middle of the defense, that's your heartbeat of the defense here, and I'm very concerned about this unit for Arkansas here.
Now looking at the secondary, back in 2022, I said that they would have the worst pass defense in college football, and that's exactly what happened. They were dead last against the pass. They were not very good at all. Last year, I expected them to really improve big time due to some ads they made in the portal, and that's exactly what ended up happening. Dwight McGovern was probably one of the nation's best corners. Al Walcott, he was great. He's now gone. Another good offseason, though, I think, for the secondary. Pittman has did a pretty good job revamping what was a really poor unit. Jalen Braxton was very impressive in his freshman season, pencils himself in as a starter at cornerback. Marquise Robinson from South Alabama has played some slot/outside corner the last 2 years, so some versatility there. He and TJ Metcalf should battle for the slot. following Lorando Johnson's transfer. Miguel Mitchell played a lot of snaps for Florida, missed plenty of tackles, wasn't all that good in coverage. But Jaden Johnson, he's the top returning tackler for them. He was a very sound wrap-up guy. Had a poor game versus Ole Miss. That dynamic attack really, showcased his lack of instincts. A player, again, who was still pretty solid for them. Opposite side of Braxton, though, Jaheim Singletary, good length, an aggressive player who has good instincts, fluid runner, mirrors very well downfield. They're hoping he can regain that form he had before the LSU game where he was just burned often. And I think he should improve heavily, and I think he'll work his way back into that CB2, and he'll be a starter this year. Danico Slaughter, he comes over from Tennessee, a quick trigger. He's such an asset versus the run, big-time hitter. Did allow an 82% completion rating this past year, though. Doesn't possess great ball skills. Seems better suited to play the safety role, but he has that notable versatility. And then Hudson Clark coming back for another year. He really improved significantly as a tackler, Nick, but he's an average cover player, doesn't have great closing speed, does a good job in terms of positioning, and again, he lacks athleticism. I think the secondary is going to blossom even more into last year, Nick. I think Singletary and Braxton as a duo. I'm putting all my cards on the table here when I'm saying Singletary is going to regain that form he had. This is a former 5-star in his own right as well. I think this is a nice cornerback duo they have. I think the secondary is going to be a big-time leader for this defense.
There are some positives in the secondary, certainly some room to grow. 2 adds from fellow SEC programs. Mitchell, I like what I saw out of him at Florida at times, 37 total tackles, a pick, and 2 pass breakups for him. Slaughter, 10 games, 32 total tackles at Tennessee. Very versatile, really solid against the run. Braxton, like him a lot, 20 total tackles in limited games. Interception, 8 pass breakups for him, led the team certainly in that category. Hudson Clark, 51 total tackles, nice returning amount of tackle production there, second leading returning tackler. 1 interception, 4 pass breakups. Jaden Johnson, your top returning tackler, with 62 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss, interception, 3 pass breakups for him, solid numbers. Singletary, I like him in his limited snaps, 17 total tackles and 4 pass breakups. I think Robinson's a great add from South Alabama. That was a really solid defense last year. And some other depth pieces like Keon Stewart and TJ Metcalf add some good depth. I do like this secondary unit. I think this is the best unit on this defense, and they have a lot of room to grow and develop, in my opinion.
They also landed 119th overall ranked recruit, Selman Bridges at corner. So they've done a good job of adding guys in the portal and recruiting. So I think this is a secondary that, again, just a couple years ago was horrible, and now they're on track to probably be one of the better ones in this conference. My defensive verdict is really, the defensive line has an impressive starting 4. The rotation is questionable, at least early on. Linebacking group seems destined to get flat-out gashed this year. And, alluding back to the work Pittman has done in the secondary, I still think it'll be a strong group. But playmaking in terms of ball skills, it's not as well defined, but they do seem in line to have, more of a consistent passer if June Kaj is the real deal. So I think this is a defense that's going to show some improvements this year, Nick. Against the run, though, against tougher opponents, I think with this linebacking core could be, big-time ask for them to be able to step up, and I think that's where their downfall is going to be.
I like the add of June Koch. I think he's a really solid player. Coming over from Albany, you can really plug him in. Landon Jackson returning on the left side. A nice 1-2 punch down the left and right side of the defensive edge there. I think Gregory's really solid in the middle. Hudson Clark, Jalen Braxton are 2 good returners. I think this linebacking group is very concerning, very shallow, very inexperienced, but I like the front 4. I think they do struggle with rotation up front, certainly. But I like the secondary unit top to bottom. They're very solid. A bunch of guys coming up with a lot to prove. That secondary unit could be a really good leader for this defense, could carry this defense to being a productive season. Last year they gave up 202 pass yards per game, 32nd in the nation. They could certainly be around that number again. I wouldn't be surprised to see the secondary around that number again.
Now moving to the Arkansas 2024 prediction. The Hogs competed in all of their losses until they just somewhat gave up in some bad November losses after they beat Florida on the road. They ended up losing by 38 to Auburn, and then they got demolished by Missouri at home. So that wasn't great to see that there in the end of the season. The effort from the ground game was just flat out worried. Returning Joshua Braun helps, so I think they get better at tackle. The run game improvements will be more so, I think, from Green's skills and Jackson's toughness than the offensive line providing on the interior. The passing attack, I think they have the versatility to be good, and they should be able to expose some weaker secondaries. I think this offense will be better, but only marginally. I just want to be calm in my grade and giving them a B- because, again, they weren't very good last year, even though there's promising stuff in the receiving core. Didn't perform very well last year. The offensive line, I think, if they're going to be better, it's only going to be marginally. I think if this up-front unit can play up to the level of a Sam Pittman O-line should, then they'll probably win 8 or 9 games. While defensively, they seem primed to get worn down as games go on. They have the playmakers up front that I think will create opportunities. Secondary's not going to be a liability. The tougher passing attacks might hurt them in the middle of the field a little bit, Sam Pittman, though, needs a signature win for him to keep his job. Doesn't have one yet. Don't think he's going to get one here. I hate to pick him to go 4-8, Nick, but last year I picked him to be great. I even said that you should hammer their over on their win total. Came nowhere near it, right? I think week 2 you start with Oklahoma State, Ollie Gordon, their rushing attack. I think they're going to expose exactly what we were talking about with their really good offensive line. And I think in conference play it's going to be tough. I think going on the road is going to be a big trap game for them in Mississippi State. That's another game I think they could potentially lose. And I think I know this home environment is something you're going to talk about with some of these guys that come to town, Nick. I just don't have them beating really anyone in conference other than the Bulldogs.
I do think the home environment, I've been to a game out there in Fayetteville. It's a very loud environment. Those fans certainly do get riled up. I think their schedule is not horrendous when you look at the home and away splits, certainly in conference, right? You're hosting LSU, you're hosting Tennessee, you're hosting Texas and Ole Miss. Definitely the tougher teams in your schedule. Obviously, the A&M game, you get to avoid playing at Kyle Field by playing at a neutral site down there in Arlington, traveling to Missouri, traveling to Auburn, and traveling to Mississippi State. You know, Missouri's going to be great this year, but Mississippi State, they're not going to be very good in Auburn. Still a lot of question marks there. I don't think they pick off a win in Auburn. Personally, I think Auburn is just tough to play at Jordan Hare as well. But I wouldn't be surprised if this Arkansas team finds a way to upset potentially Tennessee, Ole Miss, one of those teams at home if they get them at the right time of the season, if they get lucky there. This is a tough schedule in terms of the out-of-conference. By adding Oklahoma State on the road, a very tough matchup. I think you do get easy wins against Arkansas Pine Bluff down there in Little Rock and at UAB and Louisiana Tech at home. I do hate to say 4-8. I think 4-8 means Pittman is certainly out the door. I was surprised he kept his job, especially after the issues, the locker room issues at halftime where they were watching a movie, when they were getting blown out by Auburn and some other issues on the field. I don't know if they can do much better than Pittman. I really would wonder who would get that job should he lose his job. But at 4-8, I think Pittman would have to lose his job. If they do get a signature win and finish 5-7, potentially beating, let's just say for argument's sake, Texas at home in November, that could definitely save his job. I do think that atmosphere is no joke. If this team is playing well, if they got some momentum and that stadium is loud and rocking, they could definitely shock a team.
I think he's likely gone before that Texas game, Nick, if this schedule prediction comes to fruition. 4-8 for us, unfortunately. No Arkansas fans will be happy with that. But I was very high on this team a season ago, and they underperformed, and they took a bit of a step backwards, I think, in certain areas, at least in terms of upside. That's going to be it for today's episode, Nick. As always, appreciate you joining me. A lot of episodes coming at you guys, so we certainly appreciate you tuning in. And, Nick, of course, this is going to be a fun off-season.
Super excited to get back into this. I love doing the previews. Always fun to deep dive into these teams and get a better understanding of the roster before the season starts. We start here in the SEC with Arkansas. We start with them pretty much every single year. They like to be our kickoff team. The Hogs, they got a great fan base down there in Fayetteville. The team has some solid pieces. I just worry the schedule against some of these tougher SEC opponents are going to be a little too much. Interesting to see how it shakes out for this team, though, as the season goes on.
Make sure you guys like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.